Hello there. My name's James Kelleher. I'm a recent graduate from the Winterthur program in American Material Culture. And last time I was here, we chatted about the Heart Room, one of the oldest rooms in the Winterthur Museum. Today we're going to be continuing on that same theme of very old spaces and talking about the Wentworth Room, one of my favorite rooms in the entire museum. The house that this room was taken from was built in the late 17th century and modified in the early 18th century. And one of the reasons that it's one of my favorite rooms is that it illustrates, better than I think any other space in the house, this pretty momentous transition that occurred between two very different ideas of ornament, of finish, and of the conception of space in early American architecture. So this house was built in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, a prosperous merchant and shipping town on the mouth of the Piscataqua River, which provided access to the resource-rich interiors of Maine and New Hampshire. It was built for John Wentworth of the prominent Portsmouth Wentworth family, who would go on to become the Lieutenant Royal Governor of the colony of New Hampshire. So just to put this room in context a little bit, this is the upper left room of a center chimney, 4-room house. So what that means is that's the front of the house, this is the rear. You would have opened the front door, gone up a staircase, gone to the left, and find yourself in this room. That, being the chimney, is the center of the house. The fact that there was this level of finish on an upstairs room is unusual. Upstairs rooms are more private. Earlier in the 17th century, they were often used as storage spaces or sleeping spaces, but not public display spaces. So this level of finish in the upstairs and in the smaller of the upstairs rooms suggests that just how extravagant the ground floor must have been. It also suggests John Wentworth's exceptional wealth. Though this was only a 4-room house, it was a large 4-room house. By any respect in colonial Portsmouth, this would have been considered a mansion. So the ornament in this room as it exists today really falls into two basic camps, the late 17th century and the early 18th century. Now, the late 17th century ornament that we can see here, which is original to the house's construction, presumably, is really well illustrated by these beams and wall girts that we're seeing here. Now, I mentioned in my video on the Heart Room that in most of the 17th century in America, ornament was applied directly to structural members, chamfers and even sometimes carving on beams, mantelpieces, lintels, etc. Here, you can see this fairly elaborate, comparatively speaking, quarter circular chamfering and molding applied not only to this exceptionally large summer beam here, but also to this wall girt. And these moldings continue all throughout the room on the summer beams and wall girts. That would have represented a quite excessive amount of labor and time, and therefore expense. When it was built in the late 17th century, this was a very fine house. So by 1720, 1730, maybe as early as 1710, it's hard to say, this, plaster walls, the heavy chamfered beams, it's starting to look very old, especially for someone of means like John Wentworth. It's starting to be perhaps embarrassingly out of style. So what do? You could tear down your house and build another one, but it's a perfectly serviceable house. And it's big. It was big in 1690, and it's still big in 1720. So what you do is hire a team of craftspeople to update things. You put in your classical paneling with, again, this great moldings that take the light, whatever available light is in this room, and play with it and make it fun and interesting to look at. What you're actually seeing here is a very literal junction between an essentially medieval or post-medieval and a classical revival type of ornament. Nowhere else in Winterthur do you get that on the nose a comparison, and that's one of the reasons I like this room so much. So by the early 18th century, sometime probably previous to 1730 or so, John Wentworth decided to upgrade the style of his house. And That's when he installed this paneling that you see all around the room here, and my favorite piece in the room, this absolutely massive fireplace around here. Now this style, you could call it a couple things. You could call it, depending on when it was actually made, you could call it Queen Anne, you could call it early Georgian, but I think the best term for it really is what art historians would use, which is Baroque. When you think of Baroque paintings, Baroque art and architecture, you think a lot about contrasts, things like light and dark, light and heavy. I think that's really well illustrated, again, by this fireplace surround. This thing's massive. It's 9 or 10 inches across. And look at these exuberant shapes here. They're based in classical Greek and Roman precedent, but only a little bit. They really take on a life of their own here, certainly in the colonies, and certainly in this early 18th century period. The effects of light and shadow generated here under normal lighting are just exceptional, and to imagine it with a fire in the fireplace, I think it really would have been something to behold. Houses, more than almost any other art form, change over time. They have long lives, and over those lives they reflect the changing desires and aspirations of the people who live in them. The Wentworth Room is just one example of how a person of means updated their house to suit changing tastes and fashions. It's something all sorts of people do and continue to do today. Rooms like this tell us what people wanted out of a household and how what people wanted changed over time. So this has been the Wentworth Room again, and thank you so much.